TNTRadio.live.
Online streaming.
Be a part of the conversation.
I stream it all at work, and I stream it to my phone and listen to it wherever I go.
TNT.
Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. We're in hour number 2 of this live broadcast. I'm your host, Patrick Henningsen. Thank you for rejoining us here. I want to welcome onto the stage a very special guest. Very pleased to be joined by Miko Peled. He is an American-Israeli activist. He's been an advocate for peace, a leading voice in my mind and many others of common sense about what's happening and unfolding in the region right now. We've got him on the line. Miko, first of all, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you. Good to be with you.
And I did mention, of course, that you're also the author of a couple of excellent pieces of literature, including The General's Son, The Journey of an Israeli in Palestine. Miko, your life's history is very interesting and has shaped your worldview and your view of your former country where you were born. For those who aren't familiar with you, just give us a brief introduction about yourself, Miko, and how you came to where you're at right now.
Sure. Well, thank you again for having me on the show. I was born and raised in Jerusalem to a very patriotic Israeli family. My father, as the title of my book suggests, was a general in the Israeli army. And he was a general at a period where the generals were godlike. He was a general in the 60s, and so he was one of the commanders and the architects of the 1967 war. He was a young officer when the state of Israel was established and remained as a career officer to build the Israeli army. So from 1948 till 1967, that was the majority of his career. And that was when all the work was done to establish the state of Israel and establish the army. So, that generation are really like God figures in Israeli thinking, in Israeli mentality. And there were other members of my family who held important positions before the state of Israel was established in promoting the idea of the state of Israel and establishing what they call a Jewish state in Palestine. And then others who, also held important positions. So I grew up in this environment where the state was really important, and everything you can do to contribute to your state and to your country that was the conversation I heard all over. And that, it wasn't until many, I should say not years, but decades later that I realized that I was actually living in Palestine and what can only be described as a sphere where privileged occupiers reside and completely ignore, not to mention exploit, the indigenous population who are the Palestinians. So that's kind of the short version.
So, Miko, I mean, you've been so active and outspoken on this issue for a very long time, and looking at your career, everything that you've done, all the public speaking engagements, all the media engagements, everything you've done, and then at some point you realize a lot of people were exasperated at the fact that there was no progress being made on this issue in recent years, and then October 7th happens, and all of a sudden, for positive and negative, the horror and the silver lining, perhaps, that the issue was elevated to the world stage in a way that I never thought I would see again. I really was losing hope over this issue, and then you're now thrust back as a sort of really important voice, I think. Tell us about your feelings when this happened on October 7th. Is it something that you expected to happen eventually, or were you surprised? And then tell me how this is different from previous situations like Protective Edge, Cast Lead, major attacks, incursions on Gaza in the past. Go ahead, Miko.
Well, I wasn't surprised. I think this was predictable and preventable. I've been saying for a long time that, as these other assaults on Gaza were taking place in the past, over decades, there was a very clear trend of things getting worse, and there was no reason for it to stop. Worse for the Palestinians. Some people would say that there is progress and it's positive, so, it all depends on where you stand on this issue. But in terms of this, it was preventable, it was predictable. In the weeks leading up to this, I had a sense that something was coming up. Things were far too quiet. And again, and again, looking forward, unless something major happens and we demand and enter the killing and the suffering of Palestinians and the oppression of Palestinians, then it's going to get even worse. So I have, the videos of things I've been saying over the years are being regurgitated on social media and repeated and shared. And over again, I've been saying, we're going to look at these days, the pre-October 7th days, the good old days. And guess what? Here we are, whether you're a Palestinian in the West Bank, whether you're a Palestinian in Jerusalem, whether you're a Palestinian, citizens of Israel, things they are much worse than they've ever been before, and they were not very good before. So no, I wasn't surprised at all. And I was surprised, and I'm still surprised, impressed, I should say, maybe is a better word, at the capabilities that the Palestinian fighters from Gaza were able to show, because these guys came out of what is clearly one of the poorest and most oppressed areas in the world. And they pretty much were able to completely disable, paralyze the state of Israel. And the state of Israel is still in a state of chaos and paralysis, economically, militarily, in terms of people's daily lives. I mean, everything has been disrupted. And the fighting goes on, even with this butchery that we see in Gaza and the bodies piling up, bodies of civilians piling up by the tens of thousands. The Palestinian fighters are still at it. They're still fighting, and they're fighting hard, and they're making a dent in the Israeli forces. So, in the Israeli force ability to fight. And so that, I think, is something that is surprising and impressive. But in terms of the fact that things are getting worse and this massive assault is taking place, I think it was predictable, and I will say again, preventable.
And also, you have a firsthand experience as well with the the Lebanon War as well in the 80s. So what was society like within Israel in that kind of wartime situation? How is it different today? Because we see the current prime minister has always made this his big selling point of his leadership is, I will protect you. I'm the only one who can deliver security for the state of Israel. Get behind me and my new coalition. We're going to protect you. That seems to all be thrown into question right now. And some Israelis we're told, I don't know if this is true, maybe you could give us a little more insight of this, are voting with their feet on that issue. And many have left settlements, especially in the north, and maybe even left the country. Tell us the situation inside Israel right now, how it's different from the past.
Well, Netanyahu failed on every possible front. There's no question. And you're right. His slogan was, you can trust me, I can keep you safe. Well, on October the 7th, Israelis were not safe. I mean, the military base of the Gaza Brigade, which is the central brigade that was supposed to protect the Israeli settlements in the southern part of the country from precisely this sort of attack, was taken by the Palestinian fighters. The very base of that headquarters of that brigade was taken by these, scrappy fighters. They're not an army. They're not an army. They don't have the logistics, the capabilities, the resources, the support systems. These guys are coming out of Gaza Strip for crying out loud. And they took over that massive military base, not to mention 22 Israeli settlements in that part of the country, not to mention, like I said, disabling and really creating a state of dysfunction in the entire state of Israel. So Netanyahu and his government have failed on every level by any standard. There's no question about that. Whether or not this is going to impact him politically is a whole other question, because he knows how to maneuver and manage the political world within Israel, and always maintain, and always remain on top. Israelis are in a state of confusion. Israelis are, on the one hand, there's a sense of we are all in this together. We're patriots. If you look at, social media, Israelis that I know and so on, I mean, everybody, we are one. We're fighting together. We're going to win this, blah, blah, blah. You see this in the Israeli press. I mean, the headlines, just above the headlines of the news, there's always these slogans, we are together, we will win, we will fight, and on and on. But the reality is far from that. The reality is that there's a state of chaos. The different political factions within the political world and the Israeli political world are eating each other up. They're biting it. They're at each other's heels. They're, attacking each other. They're, information from classified meetings of the government and the military are being leaked, and so everybody knows who hates who and who said what to whom and who attacked. So there's no real unity at all. But they've got the slogans out there. So it's a state of chaos. And really, again, going back to the accomplishments of these fighters who came out of the Gaza Strip, and again, I'll say one of the most oppressed, poorest place on earth. I mean, people are lucky if they have one meal a day and if they can find clean water that's fit for human consumption. It's rare on regular basis, never mind when the bombing is going on. And so they were able to, paralyze the state of Israel, put it in a state of total confusion for months now. The military is not winning. The entrance to the Red Sea is being blocked by Yemeni forces. Israel has been dragged to the International Criminal, the Court of Justice. Israel, things are going downhill very, very fast, and they're pretending that they've got everything under control. And people are confused. People are really confused. They don't know who to believe. They don't know, and they see that their lives and their security are now in jeopardy like never before.
And so put yourself into the shoes. Remember when you were a young man serving in the IDF, what's going through their minds? You have people, 19, 20, 21, 22 being sent into the Gaza Strip in a ground war over the last 3 months. I mean, there's never been an extended campaign like this into the occupied territories, into the Palestinian areas. What is this like? Is there a level of is there a potential of dissent among the ranks? Is there a level of conditioning or indoctrination that's required to get people to sort of, buy into these types of operations? Because the rest of the world's looking at this in horror, Miko, thinking this is a genocide. You've got the case in the ICJ, yet you still have to deploy your reservists, your military. Tell us what might be going on in their minds and within the groups and so forth.
Well, I mean, so we just the other day, some 21 or 22 soldiers were killed in one explosion in one go. So they're being killed very rapidly. Very high-ranking officers are being killed. Reservists are being killed. People are doing younger people are being killed. So they're not winning. The destruction is horrifying. Of course, you need an enormous amount of indoctrination to be willing to do that. And I went through the same indoctrination, but somehow you mentioned the Lebanon War at the time. So the invasion into Lebanon of 1982, I was in my last year of service. I wasn't a combat soldier at all then, but I was, serving in a base near Tel Aviv. I was perfectly safe. And, but there was a sense, there were protesters and there were people who were refusing to go into Lebanon. Even my father, who was a retired general by then, called on soldiers to refuse to serve in Lebanon because he said it was a war crime taking place there. And there were massive protests against the government for lying about Lebanon, for the massacre of Sabra al-Shatila, the two refugee camps in southern Lebanon, in southern Beirut, and so on. So, I mean, there was a sense that dissent was acceptable, even though you still paid a price for dissent, but there was dissent. One of the first things that happened after October 7th was the Israeli chief of police stood up and said that he has ordered his officers not to tolerate any dissent whatsoever. No protests, no dissent in any way, shape, or form. And you don't see dissent. You see small groups of Israelis trying to protest here and there against the slaughter. You see the families of the hostages that were taken protesting, demanding that the government negotiate to free the hostages. They're being beat up on the street. They're being, told that they're traitors. So there's no dissent permitted whatsoever. And I think the difference is that there was still in those days, in the 80s, there was still a sense of that Israel was safe enough where it could allow for dissent. And this is an internal feeling. And today, the situation is so severe that they're afraid even of the small. I mean, Palestinians are afraid to text each other. I'm talking about Palestinian citizens of Israel. They're afraid to go to work. They're afraid to go out in the streets. It's a life of. It was always a life of terror, but now it's magnified. So the situation is different somehow in that regard, but the sense of I can't imagine what soldiers in the Gaza Strip now must be feeling, because I mean they've destroyed everything. the number of civilians, I mean, all of Gaza are civilians, except for a small groups of guerrilla fighters. They're all civilians. So, I mean, I don't know how they live with themselves. I don't know how they get up in the morning, how they, but what's interesting is I've been looking at the social media pages of the different IDF units. Every commando, every brigade, every regiment has their own Instagram page, and they've got all these photos, and they're showing these images of the soldiers almost heroically standing in Gaza, destruction all around them, but the soldiers like in high definition, kneeling, about to take a shot, or, and then, the caption is, of course, keeping us safe, killing terrorists, and that sort of thing. So they're working very hard to maintain the image of the heroism, which of course never existed in the IDF. So yeah, it's got to be crazy.
And you're in America, Miko, so you're well placed to observe the way America frames the American media, the body politic, the way they frame this issue, and it's like Israel versus Hamas. It's not Israel versus the Palestinian people, or it's as if nothing happened for the last 75 years, that everything began on October 7th, that sort of framing of it, this kind of narrow band. And then as Hamas is prescribed as a terrorist group in the US and in Britain and the EU and so forth, it's almost like, anything goes. It just justifies anything, that this is a state of emergency. It's Israel's 9/11. And this brings us to that tough conversation that a lot of people struggle with, Miko, looking at history of armed liberation struggles, be they in South Africa or wherever, who were declared as terrorists at one point in history, but later in history or not. But it's a very difficult to have an objective conversation because of this overarching cloud of Hamas as terrorists and the atrocities of October 7th. Can you speak to this dynamic, how you're seeing this?
Well, of course, I mean, the PR machine is working very hard, and the slogans are very effective. So it was interesting because I'm here in the US, and I'm giving lectures on campuses and all over the place. And then I was in Australia for a week in December. And the same questions are being asked, and the same slogans are being thrown out, and the news is saying, and the news interviews are asking. I'm saying, how does it so fast? I mean, 2 days ago I was on a campus here in the U.S., and today I'm in Melbourne, and you're asking me the same questions, and you've got the exact same playbook that fast. It's impressive how fast it is. It's like they've all been given the playbook. They sat up all night and studied it, and that's it. They know exactly what to say, what to ask, and how to frame it. And that's exactly the framing. It's always Israel war against Hamas, Israel war against Hamas. From time to time, they'll say Gaza instead of Hamas. But of course, like you said, it's complete nonsense. Israel waged the war, and this is how my response in every single interview, my first response: Israel waged the war against the Palestinian people 75 years ago. They've been massacring Palestinians for 75 years, actually 76 years, because it started before Israel was established officially as a state. And this is granted, this is even by the horrors that Israel commits, this is a new high, but it's not different than everything else that's been happening up to this point. Except for, of course, the count of civilians being allowed to be massacred. But I mean, yeah, this is part of a larger war against the Palestinian people. This is granted a heightened level of the genocide. I mean, I don't know that they've ever murdered that many people in such a short amount of time, but it's been genocide. And there's two things that are interesting about genocide. That it's not just a systemic killing of a people, although that of course is a big part of that. But it's also the destruction of their country, the destruction of their identity, denying their identity, taking away their land. So over the last 75 years, Palestine was taken, and the name changed. For some reason, the world accepted it. Nobody calls it Palestine anymore. People call it Israel. At best, they call it Israel and the territories, or something like that. They changed the names of cities. Towns and villages that were destroyed now have Israeli settlements with different names. The cities that were taken, major cities that were taken, they were Palestinian cities, the names of the streets were changed. And so where Palestinians, in some of these cities, you still have Palestinians living, suddenly instead of the Palestinian Arab names that are historical names and are related to the history of the country, you've got all these Zionist names of all these war criminals and generals and presidents and so on. So this is all part, and then denying Palestinians' identity. I mean, how many times have Israeli leaders said there are no Palestinian people? Going back 75 years. So this is all part of the genocide. And what we're seeing now, of course, the very open discussion in the Israeli, by Israeli, people who hold very high office, important members of the Israeli government, talking about the displacement of 2 million people into other countries. Like it's taken for granted. And the people interviewing them are not challenging them about the morality. They're not challenging them about how the absurdity of this. They're just letting them talk, and then they ask them questions about the details and so on. So it's madness. I mean, it's been genocide. Like I said, this particular chapter of the genocide was predictable and could have been prevented. So all these tens of thousands of dead civilians didn't have to die. But nobody wants to recognize it. Took this for the first genocide petition, to be presented against Israel. It took this. This could have been done a year ago, 10 years ago. There's plenty of proof that it's genocide. So that's the reality in which Palestinians exist, and unless something drastic happens to stop it, it's not going to stop.
So look the big picture on this. Miko, would you believe, or would you agree that 10 years ago, 20 years ago, that there was a point where the international community or the United States, whoever, would put pressure on Israel to apply the brakes, or pressure within Israeli society to apply the brakes, that it wouldn't go this far? And as you commented, Miko, that there's people that are in complete denial, or not wanting to acknowledge that this is an ongoing genocide right in front of their eyes. I mean, is this a case of there's some change in societal attitudes in Israel, in the West, that this is allowed to commence in the way that it has? Because I'm shocked that there's not more politicians who, I don't know, maybe want to be judged better in history as doing the moral thing, and they're quiet about it. Everyone seems to be browbeaten. How do you explain the change, or how do you square this?
Well, I don't think there's change that is that dramatic yet. I mean, certainly taking Israel to the ICJ, to the court, is a big step. And I understand there's going to be another petition coming up, also presented by the South Africans, which accuses Israel of a longer genocide, the genocide of 75 years, which I think is much more appropriate. But I think, to be honest, let me put it this way. If you walk into congressional offices in Washington, D.C., you see tables, chairs, staffers, and Israeli lobbyists. I mean, they're part of the furniture. They're always there. Member of Congress, members of the press, elected officials, going up, from school board members through city council members to state legislatures, all the way up to the president. They get emails and letters and notifications by the hundreds every day from every Zionist group that exists out there, local, national, and so on. There's no one presenting the other side. If you were an American politician, you wanted to create an informed opinion and then make an informed decision, you can't. You don't have the information. Nobody has presented the Palestinian case in a comprehensive way. There's no institution that has ever done that, or that is doing it right now. We're actually working on an initiative here in DC to start that right now. But there's nothing ever been done that it's even remotely comparable to what the Zionists have been doing for 75 years, or more, I should say 100 years, more than 100 years actually, because they began long before Israel was established. There is no parallel. There's no information coming from the other side, unless there's like a catastrophe, like what we're seeing right now. But there's never context. So if you were to discuss what is a free Palestine, or the possibility of a free Palestine, all of historic Palestine, from the river to the sea, free and liberated and democratic with equal rights, people don't have a frame of reference because they don't know there used to be a Palestine. They don't know that there was a Palestine. They don't know what Palestine is. They've never seen a Palestinian. They've never seen a beautiful picture of a Palestinian. They've never read a book by a Palestinian or a poem by a Palestinian. They don't know that this exists. And of course, they don't know the story. They've never been told the full, compelling story of the Palestinian story, the Palestinian people. in the absence of that, there's not change can't happen, because the most basic thing you need before the pressure, before the lobbying, before the money and supporting and the politics is basic information, is education. People need to know, and they don't have that. Whereas from primary school, you're getting fed in school, on TV, in church, in the synagogue. You're being fed all this Zionist propaganda your entire life. So I think that is maybe the biggest problem that we're facing right now.
And you spend a lot of time on college campuses, Miko. I know you speak at a lot of college student unions. You do a lot of presentations. You interact with a lot of different types of higher education students around the country. And what do you make of in the last 3 months, and suddenly this chant "From the river to the sea" is being used to clamp down on student protest? It's been characterized as a genocidal chant. We had the Theater of Congress on this. Top university presidents resigning over this. I mean, it seems to me extraordinary, because just explain the genesis of that chant, what it actually means, and what do you think about how it's been weaponized against students and Palestinian supporters? Go ahead.
I think we need to see the larger context here. So the Zionists have think tanks, and this is what they do. They think up ideas. So a few years ago, somebody said, well, we need to change the definition of anti-Semitism, because if anti-Semitism is only racism directed at Jews, that doesn't involve Israel. And since there are many Jewish people who reject Israel, and now the claim that Israel is a racist endeavor is catching on, we need to stop that. So let's create this new definition, and that's what happened. They created a new definition. It's called the working definition of anti-Semitism. And in the examples within the working definition, there are examples of saying, for example, that Israel does not have the right to exist, and Israel is a racist endeavor, and so on. And then they went from county to county, from every governmental organization, university, colleges, churches, all the non-governmental organizations, you name it, councils, I mean, you name it, and demanded and received recognition of this new adoption of this new definition. Nobody knows exactly what it means. What it means when you adopt it, but now people are scared to criticize Israel because they're going to be called anti-Semitic. So somebody in that room was sitting again and saying, well, let's see if we can, what else can we take that is being said, being used against us, that we can now throw at them. And then somebody came up with this idea that from the river to the sea is hate speech. And I was sitting I gave a talk about a month ago at a library in near Albany, New York, in Bethlehem. And as I'm speaking, so, the Zionists came, which they don't often do to my events, but they came, and there was a ruckus and all this. And suddenly a library administrator is coming to me and he goes, no, you can't say that. I said, I can't say what? Mm-hmm. He said, you can't say river to the sea. I said, it's a geographical, description of the country. It's between the River Jordan and the Mediterranean Sea, and it's very commonly used. He said, no, you can't use that, or else we'll have to stop the event. It's a level of madness that is, what is the river to the sea? Between the River Jordan and the Mediterranean Sea. And it became a slogan, from the river to the sea, is Palestine. That's what Palestine, or if you want to call it Israel, some people call it Israel. That's where it exists. Now, if you say it between the river and the sea, Palestine, they will be free. They say, aha, you mean free of Jews, don't you? Well, nobody ever said that. Nobody ever thought that. Free, they're really brilliant, because they can take a word like freedom, justice, human rights, equality, and turn it into hate speech and claim that it's hate speech. And the amazing thing is that people buy into this nonsense and accept it. So a free Palestine from the river to the sea, free of apartheid, free of genocide, free of violence, free of checkpoints. It'll be free for everyone with human rights. This will be good for Israelis too. This is the recipe for peace. There is no other recipe that can lead to a peace between Israelis and Palestinians other than a free Palestine from the river to the sea with equal rights. There is no other way to bring about peace. That is the recipe. But of course, that's what they're afraid of. So now they said, okay, from the river to the sea is the new anti-Semitism. And then I'm sure in a week or two or a month or two, there's going to be a new slogan that they don't like. And everybody's going to be, and then people are going to be attacked for using that slogan. They're very, very good at it. And they've got people, getting 6 digits, sitting in rooms, getting paid 6 digits to come up with this nonsense. And we don't.
So that brings up the question of the future of Palestine, the future of Israel. This a long running debate, a two-state solution, one-state solution, no state solution. Where do you see the future going forward? First question I want to ask is, how do you see a ceasefire taking place? Just the immediate relief, getting aid, and what needs to happen in your opinion, Miko? And then what about the future of the region? Go ahead.
Well, what I think needs to happen is I think the U.S. Navy Sixth Fleet, which operates in the Mediterranean, needs to immediately provide humanitarian aid to the people in Gaza and enforce a no-fly zone over Gaza. That's the first thing that has to happen. So when I say this, of course, people think I'm out of my mind, but that's the first thing that needs to happen. It's our Navy. We're paying for it. It needs to serve our interests as human beings, as American citizens, not the interests of a lunatic government that is operating in Israel. And so that's the first thing that I think needs to happen. There's not going to be a ceasefire unless somebody forces Israel to stop killing Palestinians. Now, what does ceasefire mean anyway? Israel has signed thousands of God knows how many ceasefire agreements, and they've always violated them. A day later, 2 days later, they always violate ceasefire agreements. They always have. Ceasefire agreement means nothing. That's why I say, if we're going to do something, it's got to be huge. It's got to be impactful. It's got to be dramatic. It's got to be big. The Sixth Fleet shows up on the coast of Gaza, and that's it. Nobody fires a gun anymore. Immediate aid to the people of Gaza, billions of dollars to go into Gaza and rebuild and rehabilitate, and then no-fly zone, and then moving on quickly to dismantle the apartheid regime, the apartheid state. That has to happen immediately, unconditionally, so that we guarantee the safety and security of Palestinians once and for all and forever through a permanent agreement, not a ceasefire agreement, a permanent political solution. That's got to happen. One state, two state is not a conversation. It's not a serious debate. It's not a debate. It's nonsense. Two state, anybody who still talks about two states, is either completely ignorant or is lying and doesn't want to really face the truth. Because the truth of the matter is that all of Palestine is a single state. It's the state of Israel, all of it. There's not a single, square inch of Palestine that is not part of the state of Israel. It's an apartheid state, so you have Israelis like myself who live with privilege and Palestinians who live, with no rights. And again, it goes beyond that because Palestinians live under different bureaucracies, different sets of laws regarding where they're located geographically. It's really complicated. Very complex web of bureaucracies, but the reality is they live without rights. That's the reality. It's a single state. You have Israeli settlements across the street from Palestinian towns and villages and cities. That's the reality. There is no way to slice and divide the country. It's a single state, done deal, and there's never going to be a scenario, and we have a 75-year history that shows it, where the Israeli state, the Zionist state, will ever allow the Palestinians to be recognized as a nation, as a country, and so on. And we see where this leads us. In other words, we see the apartheid, we see the genocide, we see the ethnic cleansing. These are major crimes against humanity that have been going on for 75 years. So anybody who wants to support Israel, this is it. This is it. There's no other pie in the sky, peace-loving Israel. This is it. There is another option, though. There is the option of dismantling apartheid, of imposing severe sanctions until this apartheid regime collapses, bringing Israeli society and the state to its knees, like was done before in South Africa, for example, and then allowing a democracy, free Palestine, a democratic state with equal rights on all of historic Palestine to emerge, just like they did in South Africa. Except I would say the challenges in South Africa were far greater because it's a much bigger country. And they had ended up with some 30 or 40 million Black Africans who were impoverished and never had a chance to go to school. Palestinian society and Israeli society are highly educated. They can go to work tomorrow and create a very functioning democracy the next day. They don't need to learn, you don't need those basic tools of building schools and that sort of thing. It's already there, very highly educated communities. So that's if anybody wants to talk about peace, first thing you have to do is you have to dismantle apartheid. You have to end the killing of Palestinians. You have to provide safety for the Palestinian people. And you have to create an environment of tolerance, of equality. You have to create that equality for the first time. That's never happened. It's never been in existence. And once you have a democratic state with equal rights over all of Palestine, free from apartheid and genocide and checkpoints and racist laws and so on, we can talk about peace, because the next natural thing to do, the next natural process is, or the next natural step is peace between Israelis and Palestinians so that they can function, so that this new state can function. And I think it's a byproduct. It's inevitable. Once you do that, peace is inevitable, because now these two nations are living in a democracy where they share the responsibilities and they share the benefits.
Well, that's a path that's been a brave path, a difficult path, but it's been taken by other countries before that transition has happened. So I'm certainly hopeful, Miko. I think everybody needs to be hopeful, otherwise there's no point in going forward in the future. But I am very encouraged by what you just said. I think hopefully it resonates with more people as well, especially no matter how bad this crisis we're in right now is. I'm mindful of the time, so we know that you've got to go. We really appreciate you staying with us for this long. Miko Peled, activist, author, and a great voice in these troubled times. We really appreciate you joining us on TNT, Today's News Talk this week.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
There he goes, ladies and gentlemen. That is Miko Peled. You want to follow him on X, Twitter as well. We've tagged him on our feed, so just go to his account. Keep an eye on what he's doing and also what's going on this issue in general. And I'm just very encouraged by what I've heard there. That two-state, one-state debate is so contentious, but this seems to occupy a lot of the conversation in Washington, D.C. right now. Unfortunately, a lot of people regard it as a red herring. I totally agree with what Miko said there about what is the real way forward. And, that does beg the question, especially, and this is an issue I think is important to bring up, especially for a lot of Americans, why Americans, especially conservatives, really abide and stand by and really revere the Constitution of the United States, the Bill of Rights, and what a great foundational document it is. It provides the fundamental pillars for conservatism as well. But we have a lot of people within that party that are absolutely supporting Israel, supporting the apartheid state of Israel, and are still pushing this idea of a two-state solution. So it's really kind of, in many ways, I think it's a bankrupt argument that you can want to preserve something at home, to conserve a constitutional republic at home, and all the rights that go with that: freedom of speech, freedom of religion, freedom of movement, freedom to assemble, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. You hold all those principles, all those rights dear at home, but when you're advocating for your foreign policy for other countries, you're saying, no, we don't want to advocate for that overseas with Israel and Palestine. We want a two-state solution, or we're happy with the apartheid system. And that's that. It just doesn't make any sense. And this is one of the problems, this sort of hypocrisy that's become baked in. It's almost an institutional problem in U.S. politics. And as Miko said, there's a lot of reasons for that. There's a lot of money that's been injected into the political system in the United States. I think that's distorted and warped the conversation. Certainly it's distorted policies and views of our elected representatives, of our agencies, of our media as well. And that needs to change, because until that hypocrisy is flushed out and people can sort of treat this more objectively, in other words, do unto others as you do unto yourself, and how you'd want to be treated by everybody else, how you want to be treated in your country, equal rights for everybody under the law. Why would anybody not want that? But that seems to be a problem when it comes to the Israel-Palestinian solution in terms of how the West are framing it. As we learned as well, the last nail in the coffin of this conversation on the two-state solution, looking at all of those years pursuing the Oslo peace process, is right through the 1990s, right into the 2000s. This is regarded by many now as a total red herring, that it was really only to buy time for the Israeli government to build all these settlements for, I don't know, 600,000 or 700,000 settlers. and changing facts on the ground. So, the peace negotiations really just going through the motions in public while the building of settlements expanded more and more. And that has really brought us to the point where there is no viable Palestinian state or two-state solution, as Miko said, and as many others are starting to say more vocally now. Even Medea Benjamin from Code Pink, this is a leading anti-war group in the United States. She said on this program with us just a few weeks ago that really the only viable solution is a one-state solution. So we're hearing this more and more, and even from people who may have advocated for something else in the past, they're now moving on and evolving on their positions on this. And I think this is the way forward. We need to evolve and base our policies and decisions today based on what's happening on the ground. The realities on the ground should form our policies. Otherwise, it's just pie in the sky. It's just fantasy. And the other thing that needs to stop, and this is how I'm going to wrap this conversation up, is I see a disturbing trend that needs to end. And one of those is that the leading powers in the world, countries like the United States, like Britain, are actively avoiding peace negotiations, actively avoiding de-escalation opportunities, be it in Ukraine, and even sabotaging peace deals. This happened with Ukraine early on in March 2022. Boris Johnson, the British, intervened probably on behalf of Washington, whatever, to kill any potential peace agreement between Ukraine and Moscow. And that's exactly what happened. And look at the hell that's unfolded over the last 2 years as a result. So look at the situation now in Gaza. Same thing. There have been opportunities for ceasefires. You could have put pressure on Israel anytime. This is within the U.S. ability because, in fact, the United States is supplying all the bombs, all the artillery. They're providing the reconnaissance, targeting information, drone surveillance. They're providing material support. They're providing naval support off the coast of Israel. They're providing all this. And if the United States withdraws that support, even for a few weeks, the Israeli operation is finished. It's over. So the U.S. is actually a co-belligerent. And if it wants to decide to step back, which it's within its power to do, it could change the whole situation literally overnight, both in Israel, in Gaza, and also in Ukraine. And that's a fact. And that's their disturbing trend, is this avoiding diplomacy, avoiding peace negotiations, sabotaging peace deals and pathways to peace. This is a problem we're seeing. A disturbing trend needs to end now. Politicians, activists, you guys, media, you got to get in and get on the ball on this issue before it's too late, because we are careening towards World War III. That's not a hyperbolic statement these days. Sorry, that's just the way it is. Thank you for joining us. Thank you very much to our special guest, Miko Peled, in the second hour, and a big thank you to Freddie Ponton and also Basil Valentine for weighing in as well in hour number one. Thank you, our listeners, for listening and viewing and watching TNT, Today's News Talk. I'm Patrick Henningsen, your host. I'll see you guys tomorrow, same time, same place. We've got a lot of ground to cover. It's going to be interesting. See you then.